So now we are transitioning into a new section. The title of this section is Building Resilience, Localized Action Against a Changing Climate. Well, we're going to have a panel discussion, but before we have this panel discussion, we are going to watch a film again. So this film was filmed by community partner, One Ocean Hub. The filmmaker, Harrison K. Golo, filmed this last week in a coastal community in Ghana to bring the message of a young 12-year-old woman to this discussion. In the film, Camilla highlights the impact of tidal flooding on her community and the need for inclusion and meaningful climate action. Let's watch the film.
Camilla Jakaji, and today I'd like to share with you a video evidence of the effects of tidal waves and its impact on the environment. Well, we the children, especially the school-going age, are not left out. In this video, I'll be talking about two very important questions on tidal waves. One, what are the most important priorities to address the challenges posed by tidal waves? Two, why the children's leadership and empowerment are important in tackling these challenges on tidal waves. First of all, due to the tidal waves, we the children are not able to go to school. Our homes got flooded, and as a result, our books and school uniform get wet. Education is very important for progress and development. At our schools near the shore, we the pupils can't concentrate because of the sea's noise. The strong tidal waves sometimes flood the school compound. In the process, teaching and learning resources and infrastructure are destroyed. This leads to the closure of the school for weeks or months. Secondly, the standard of living of we the children are affected by tidal waves, especially if homes are close to the seashore. Our parents who are fishermen or women look on helpless while the sea destroys our home. This affects us the children too. It results in us being homeless. The sea come and invade our homes, especially at midnight when we are sleeping. This leads to the transmission of diseases such as cholera and other waterborne diseases. This affects we the children socially and physically. In my response to the second question, children have a role to play in tackling the challenges of tidal waves. 1. We the children are the ones being affected mostly by the tidal waves, so we might be able to suggest solutions to solve such problems. 2. We children easily influence each other, so if we are involved in discussion on global warming, we will learn more about this and be part of the solution. Government sometimes should not move brings relief items, and most of the time, it is not enough. Earlier plans to build a sea defense wall to mitigate the effects of tidal waves is yet to materialize. Government has no realistic plan to tackle the effects of climate change on the environment. However, our school buildings that have been ripped up by the tidal waves were moved by the district assembly to enable us to continue with our education to secure our future.
Thank you so much to Camilla for being brave enough to share that message, and to the team around her who made that film. Now we're setting up for our panel, and the moderator of our panel will be Kate Brown. She's the executive director of the Global Island Partnership, and I'm really interested to hear what this panel has to talk about. May I please welcome Kate to the stage? Good luck.
Welcome, everyone. I'll sit down. It's painful standing up. To this session, which is on building resilience, localized action against a changing climate. And our focus in this session is really looking at how multi-stakeholder engagement and collective action at a localized level, both in islands and also in cities and local communities, is critical for creating the type of long-term systemic change that we need to see. And we've assembled a really amazing group of panelists here who have very diverse perspectives on this. And I'll introduce each of them as we move through the panel. I think we'll start here with Mr. Sefanaia Nawadra, who is the Director General of the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. Sefa, if you'd like to share a few introductory remarks.
Thank you. Glad to be here, and good to catch up with some old friends who I used to work with before. But SPREP is the Pacific's Regional Environment Program. We have 26 member states who are members of the organization, including all 21 Pacific Island states. The remaining 5 are developed countries who have, or used to have territories in the Pacific or currently have territories in the Pacific. We work in 4 main areas: governance, climate change, biodiversity, and waste and pollution. So we cover the whole range of issues, and our job is basically to help our countries to address these issues, both at the global level and at the national and regional level, so that they can address issues as their communities entrust them to do.
Thank you, Sefa, and we'll talk a little bit more with Sefa in the next part of this panel. I'm going to ask Daniel Lin, who's the Pasifika Storytelling Lead at Nia Tero, to introduce himself as well.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, everybody. Aloha. I'm coming from the islands of Hawaii, over in Waimea on the Big Island, and I am first very honored to be up here with all of you. And very inspired by this room, this space, the organization of everything. So thank you to Oceanic Global for that. And personally, I work at a Nia Tero Foundation, and so supporting storytelling in the Pacific region, working specifically with indigenous communities, storytellers, and stories that connect to place, identity, and truly with everything that has to do with the ocean too. So it's an inspiring space to be here and share story with you all. And looking forward to the session.
Thank you, Daniel. And I'd like to also introduce Mayor Mary Jane Tay, who is the Mayor of the Municipality of Libertad in Antique in the Philippines.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so honored to be with you this afternoon. And I'm a mayor of a small town in the Philippines. 26 years ago, when we first started Coastal Resource Management Program, where climate change was the mere concept. So we thought that doing that would really address it as a solution for everyone. Like, I'm also representing the Coastal 500, a global network of mayors all over the world, to have a voice, especially on events like COP, and to put pressure on the national government to really act the urgency of implementing climate change. And at the same time, I also wanted to share you my story, probably inspire some of you here for all the things that we did, because Philippines is actually a laboratory of climate disasters. And by doing that, we have to make sure that we protect our people. Everything that we do always centers or make people as the center of development and our action. So we're happy. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mayor Tay. And finally, David Obura, the Director of CORDIO East Africa. David?
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, all. It's a pleasure to be here. My organization is a non-profit research organization, CORDIO, based in Kenya, and we research coral reefs across the Western Indian Ocean. And over time, and we work a lot with small-scale fishing communities to look at sustainable fisheries on the one hand, and we look at climate impacts on reefs on the other. So we've really come to, I guess, try and occupy a space where we have a very strong grounding in local context, but in the global context as well. And I think in the case of this panel is really trying to bring those local experiences to be understood at larger scales and supported.
Thank you, and so thank you for these wonderful introductions. We're going to have a few questions to our panellists, and then right at the end, if we have enough time, we'll let the floor be open for other questions. But I'm going to start with you, Sefa, and this is a question to everyone, so if you could think through your answers. What stories can you share that demonstrate the successful engagement of stakeholders in the type of systemic change that we've been talking about in this session? And what do we learn from those examples?
Thank you, Kate. I'll start with the community level story on locally managed marine areas. These are areas that are managed according to traditional authority and traditional practices. They start off as more from a food security, livelihoods angle, but then you can also use that to push conservation and marine environment protection, bring in the issues of pollution management, waste. And we found that in countries that have taken this approach, it has a life of its own. So by word of mouth, communities share their stories, they learn from each other, and they declare their own LMMAs. One thing that also helps these communities are when they have entities like resorts, tourism operators, and even some other companies and universities partner with them to continue to help them to build the capacity to manage their own resources. At the national level, what we're seeing in many Pacific countries now is that they have come up with their national oceans policies, which is integrated management of the ocean. That's been done in dialogue with all sectors, with all levels of the community, so that when the policy and the marine spatial planning that happens after the policy is declared, it's something that everyone supports. It's something that they will need resources to address, but a lot of it comes internally from their own resources and capacity that they have within government. The other final one that I'd like to share is on an initiative called Moanataka. This is something that came out of UNEA 3. Basically, we were sitting, having a bit of a rest when an executive of Swire Shipping, one of the biggest shipping companies in the world, came around and we started talking. And then he asked, you know, I've been at this assembly, but I'm not sure where I fit in. And then in that discussion, we came up with this initiative called Moanataka, where the empty containers that go back after goods are delivered in the Pacific could be utilized to take waste for treatment and disposal in suitable facilities around the Pacific River. It's been so successful that now UNEP is working on adopting it as a global shipping initiative that will cover all SIDS regions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it's great to hear that. I think there was some clapping, thank you. Daniel. So 3 really great examples there. Daniel, the same question to you. What are some of the examples of this engagement of stakeholders in this transformative change in the ocean climate space?
Yeah, can you all hear me? Okay, this is okay. So I don't want a double mic. It feels like I need to speak up. I need to get, yeah. So for me, hearing these stories that across the board from these amazing speakers, one of the things that I find in our work at Nia Tero is, we work a lot with like indigenous, localized community stories, and oftentimes in the Pacific, it feels like these are like isolated kind of incidences where, you know, we hear this, it's community-based, we hear that. I'm particularly inspired and kind of uplifted by the kind of ways that we can actually create within this kind of map of stars and a set of constellations that actually make people feel like they're part of just a bigger momentum and bigger shift. So creating spaces, creating opportunities, creating dialogue where stories come together. It's not necessarily like a specific example of one story, but a mosaic where people, especially young people, can actually start to like see the interconnectedness of their kind of lived experience and learn from those differences. I think that's the most hopeful and that's the thing I really think should be pushed forward more, is the idea of like actually seeing the ocean as these lines of pathways that connect us, and stories are one of the most powerful ways to connect through those pathways and create those pathways. So, you know, as much as I can tell about these amazing kind of individual stories, it's that collective constellation that will really push, I think, for everybody's kind of, I think, collective buy-in to the idea of the importance of the oceans for us as humans.
Thank you, Daniel. And I know Nia has a great story about this because I moderated her in a panel yesterday. So over to you, Nia.
Oh, well, I think the main secret of governance to be effective is, I only know two. First, a strong political will of the leader to implement programs and projects like climate change, and people's participation. We put people as the center of development, the center of every action that we're doing. So in the process of, like, for example, programs that we wanted to initiate, we involve every sector of the community, from the planning to the implementation to the up to the sustainability. We wanted people to own the program. We wanted them to get involved and make sure that they're part of it. Now, it's been my, 18 years in politics, and I'm about to graduate, and you will soon ask me how will I sustain the implementation with all these programs. But for now, I am so happy to share with you that in some part of the world, change has already been established and introduced. While we are doing baby steps, while small communities like us started to really think of the effect of climate change. For me, it's not just a metaphor, it is a reality now. And we have to pressure our national government to do something and take the call that it has to start now, everybody has to take it. Now, it has been hard because when we introduce behavioral change to the people, it takes a while. Remember, it took me 26 long years for people to appreciate the importance of coastal resource management, upland preservation and all. I was able to declare, we were able to declare 40% of our forests to be under protected area. And that also, like a huge marine protected areas in the area, considering that our town is small. But by doing that, we made sure that people have enough food to eat. People are guaranteed of a better future, that in the next 10, 20 years, we have enough fish to catch in the ocean. So the preparation is not just for this generation, but it's the generation yet unborn. So I am more burdened to really make sure that we prepare this world for our generation to come, that when they come out, they have a better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Nia. Wonderful. And David, over to you with the same question about that engagement of multiple stakeholders in transformative change in ocean and climate.
So that's what we've been trying to work on in our context in East Africa is, so building a little bit on the story that Stefa started with, the locally managed marine areas, and getting a lot of acceptance at community and local government levels as well, for the importance not just of protection, of course, but of local agency in deciding what to do. And we've really learned in East Africa from the Pacific experience with locally managed marine areas. There's a lot of effort in Madagascar now, in Kenya and Tanzania, Mozambique as well. But really seeing, as you get into the local stories or the local experience about the importance of the marine environment, of course, these locally managed marine areas are so much more than just about protection. It's about rights, and it's about agency, territory, and so on. It's about food, it's about culture, and then also governance, getting real participation in governance. And what we've, from our perspective as a research organization, it's not our stories, of course, but we try and help establish a framework with partners for these stories to be heard, for discussions to happen amongst different communities and in a language that, to be honest, we can try and bring to the larger scale communities, to local government, to national government, and the international sector as well. So we're trying to frame that around the Sustainable Development Goals, because that's, of course, a language that the international community has taken on and national governments have prioritized. And if we can help get these local stories around conservation, sustainability, livelihoods expressed through the SDGs, can we expand the amount of support that can come through to local sites to help support the scaling up and the ramping up of these efforts through the local stories, through local agency.
Thank you so much, David. And I'm going to come back here and ask a couple of follow-up questions to our speakers. So, Sefa, how can SPREP help its member countries to engage in both doing things at the very local level, but then scaling that out into the national and international level?
Thank you, Kate. What we've done within SPREP is in those three thematic areas that we work, biodiversity, waste and pollution, and climate, we have coordination mechanisms amongst our own membership that is also open to other organizations and the UN to join. These serve as not only places where they can share experiences, but they also serve as places where we can strategically direct action, resources, and agree on regional plans. The Pacific Island Roundtable on Nature Conservation is in its 25th year, I think. And so it's something that continues because it's successful. And we've been able to even assist the other SIDS regions. The Caribbean comes in quite regularly to participate in some of our activities. And the Seychelles and Mauritius and the Maldives have acted with us. The governance of that is not, maybe I'll start with the membership. Membership includes member governments, but it also includes the NGOs, the universities, and the leadership is not necessarily with the SPREP or with the member governments. The last one was BirdLife International, and they've since handed over to another NGO, Island Conservation, that will be chair of the roundtable going forward. SPREP remains as the permanent secretariat to provide that continuity and to coordinate things. We have a similar one for waste. Membership there is quite different. It's mostly private sector and NGOs that work in that area, and plus the municipalities, like the mayor said, because most of the waste management is done by the municipalities. Climate change, we coordinate all the international advocacy at the moment. We used to coordinate national and regional implementation, but there were some political issues 7 years ago, so they decided to shift that somewhere else. But that organization didn't quite continue with the work that was done through that roundtable. So we've decided to reconvene that next year, so to ensure that we coordinate our climate action at the national and regional level in the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you. And anyone, I think, that's been at the Moana Pacific Pavilion will have seen that. And I think what's important in the examples that Sefa is sharing is really we're talking here about localized action, but we're also talking about how you take that very local action and kind of amplify it both across the region and the world. And we're also talking about the big ocean regions, which have a lot of impact on what we're talking about. And Sefa wants to add one thing.
Just one more thing that I think is important. One thing that's evolving now too is projects and programs that are cross SIDS regions. We have a program on governance that it's into its third phase now. And that works across Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific. We have a GEF, one of the biggest GEF projects ever, that also has Caribbean, Pacific, and the islands of Indian Ocean and Africa. And that addresses waste and the management of waste and plastics. So those projects, because they're being done together, will allow the exchange of information and people working together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sefa. Daniel, how do you amplify some of the stories that are told and that we've been hearing about, including the ones in the Pacific, but more broadly?
Yeah. I think sitting up here and talking about stories and amplification, to be honest, I don't know how to do these kinds of things any better than some of the amazing, talented storytellers in this room. I think I want to fully acknowledge that there's so much wisdom and talent and amazing kind of voices here that we should all be listening to. But from where I sit, I can at least reflect on what I don't see, and maybe through that we can kind of explore together what we should be looking for. And I think for one thing, in order to in order to kind of like engage with the idea of amplification, we should first reevaluate what a story is and how to kind of like even approach the concept of storytelling. What I see a lot is a focus on message, on content, and what I think what we really should kind of like step back and understand and explore and evaluate is like to view story as like a living being, because aside from message, aside from like imagery, aside from all of that, I feel like stories need breath. Stories need heart, stories need movement, stories need time, they need space. And oftentimes I don't see that given to stories, especially ones that have such an important message to be delivered. And the ones that do it best really, I think, embody almost a living aspect of that story. If we treat stories with that kind of respect, even if it's the most, like from the smallest molecule of a story to the biggest kind of like, grandest display of magnificence on the global scale, I think that those are the things that really connect to heart. And that was something we heard earlier, is like, not just things that connect to the mind and to policy, but to really things that connect to heart. And I think the things that connect best to heart, in my experience, are the ones that are presented as almost like a full being. You can breathe with this story, and you can cry with this story. And yeah, and I think that that is abound all across our spaces, all across our regions, all across the world. And to find that wonder is something that I think is part of the responsibility of all of us, both from an organizational perspective, from a governmental perspective, and that exists in the storytellers that we have in this room and across COP and all across the world. So, I think we should really, really try to intentionally amplify by reevaluating what our story, paradigms actually, what our engagement with that is.
I love that, Daniel. That's real transformative change. It will be challenging, but I'd love to see how that will happen. I think that's a tremendous idea. And too often, I think, as we go through the COP, we hear other people telling even our stories from our region. And I think rethinking that, even that would be really important. So thank you, Daniel. Mayor Tay, so you've got some great examples of how you've engaged the broader stakeholders and multi-sectoral approaches in Libertad. How would you see kind of taking that experience to others, and what are you doing about that?
Oh, well, I told you, telling stories is, for me, more effective to relay the message. Because, first and foremost, well, I just don't have enough time to really share with you my story, but sharing it with others and maybe copying it as well would really be very effective, because I remember telling my story, sharing our experiences back in our country. I was able to convince other mayors to join us with the call, because they have to know that we're doing it. They have to know that it has been effective. 26 years ago we started it, and we continuously do it. So for me, telling stories are more effective. Inspiring others is another. But I say I'm more burdened to really share to the world. And attending this kind of platform would be an opportunity for me to share with you the stories. At the same manner, policies in our place is in place. National might not be as serious about it, but in our country, we are allowed to establish our own policy, particularly on certain programs or projects that we're doing. So sometimes I would say we don't need the national government, because we can exist by our own. If they don't want to help us, fine, we can still do it. That's why collecting all these efforts from among the mayors all over the world will have a huge impact on our fight against climate change destructions. We know for a fact that the call is so high. The urgency is there, but some of our leaders are just taking it lightly. Some would say, okay, we'll do that, but we need a lot of money. No, it's not expensive, I can tell you. We have done it, and we keep on continue doing it. But I tell you, it's not expensive. It's a matter of your doing it according to your conscience, according to your intentions, and for the love of country and your people. For me, it's easy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Tay. And I want to also acknowledge that Mayor Tay is part of something called the Coastal 500, which is currently has 250 mayors from across the world, but is working up towards 500. That's why, hence the name, but really in this ocean climate space. So wonderful work there as well. And David, over to you. How do communities share their experiences and tell their stories for change to happen?
Thanks. So, I feel like, I'm a scientist, an ecologist, and I feel like I've sort of been put in the wrong panel to some extent. Because, when we set up our projects, and we have a real, we do have a very social and ecological framing on the work that we do. We set up our research projects, we set up our intervention projects, we have log frames, we talk to the donor. And it's also dry. And one of the things that we have tried to set up around the locally managed marine areas, again, in our region, is to set up these learning networks. I mean, we've learned finally that people learn from one another much more effectively than if somebody is up there telling them, oh, you should do this, you should do that, right? So these learning networks is it's a very open space for people to express what experiences they've had, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and to learn from one another, basically telling stories. And why can't we just set up these processes where we just say, okay, we'll set up these storytelling networks. Let's not force ourselves to frame these interventions in such strict log frames and structures that basically kill that creativity or risk doing that unless you have good facilitators and moderators and partners who can really open it up and get people to really talk about what's important to them and learn from their personal stories, as well as from the information and the knowledge and the experiences that are much more tangible. So in that sense, I think, so perhaps I am in the right panel. So we are trying to bridge that space and to have learning networks where we stop telling people what we think they should be doing, but really let people talk to one another about shared experiences, and then using these SDG stories as a way to, in a way, frame those personal experiences in a more sort of common language that you can extend across countries and across spaces, perhaps. So you kill a bit of the creativity, but perhaps by, putting some connections between them, you can help upscale, get those large funding sources to really push money down to the local level, so it becomes really accessible at the local scale and to community efforts and so on. So I'm really inspired by listening to this to see how we can set up our projects and our frames in a way that really facilitate and enable creativity rather than stifling it through planning.
Thank you so much. And yes, you're on the right panel. Otherwise, we're going to have to push your chair off. I'm going to now, I think, really wonderful. I think people might have thought we were going to get into a deep dive about specific projects. But I actually think what we're trying to do in this panel is think about how we take all these good examples that we see at very local level and connect them so that it creates something that has huge impact. Because we need to be thinking at larger scale, but action is at the local level. So our kind of discussion in this panel is really looking at how we link those two areas. We're going to open the floor for some questions, and then we have some roving mics. And then we're going to ask each of our panelists to just give a 1-minute perspective closing remarks at the end. So we'll give us about 7 minutes of questions. So I can see a gentleman at the end there.
Hello everyone, nice to meet you all. My name is Mahfoud and I come from Mombasa, Kenya. And thank you for the panelists for sharing your perspective on the topic. So my question goes to you, Mr. David. And in the context, as you say, you are focused more on sustainable fisheries, and in the context of my country per se, because as for you, you work on various coastal states and islands. So in the context of Mombasa, I think that is just not enough. It is sustainable fisheries that are run by artisanal fishermen. And when we talk about setting up MPS, most of the MPS are set up at a scope of area whereby the fishermen, mostly they have the resources to have their fishing going on at that area. So basically, we have like two situations here. We either think of maybe setting up MPS in deep sea, or we build capacity of these fishermen to have resources and learn the skills of fishing in deep sea. So in Mombasa or in Western Indian Ocean regions, which of these two contexts can work better for having an effective fishing going on? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and I think that's a question to you, David. Quite a difficult one also.
Yes, thank you. I didn't realize I had one of my own countrymen over here, or city compatriots in the floor. Yeah, so in Kenya, so I'll just answer very briefly. We have marine protected areas on the coast which are government run, but they really only cover 1% of the coastline. We hear a lot about them. And actually the scope for more marine conservation and sustainability really only comes from locally managed marine areas that are really under the jurisdiction of the small-scale fishing community, working with the fisheries department, the State Department. So trying to understand how we can have more sustainable inshore fisheries and also relieve the pressure so that they can go further offshore and access other resources is important. But we have to do all of that within a sustainability context. You can't, if you just extend pressure offshore without managing it well, you only project the problem further offshore.
And I am looking for, thank you, Bodhi.
Thank you for that beautiful panel. My name is Bodhi. I'm a 20-year-old ocean climate solutionist with SOA and Ocean Uprise. Shout out SOA in the house. So my question is to all of you. What are the most effective vehicles for young people to tap into storytelling for ocean climate action? And how can we here, the incredible youth leaders that are standing right here, get involved with the programming that you have and also get involved in future initiatives that are ongoing for storytelling? Because as we know, that captures the heart and the root of the issues, and it's driving systemic change in addition to the innovations we're leading.
Thanks, Bodhi. Sefa, I think you have a good answer to that.
Yeah, I think my advice is just to organize yourselves and approach those who are managing the processes. And they will allow you to come in. And if they don't allow you, you keep on pushing. Because really what we're negotiating here is for generations that will come later. So the earlier we involve you in the discussions, the better it will be for you later on. So you can't allow those that are blocking your participation to discourage you. We've brought in a large number of Pacific youth, probably one of the largest numbers at the COP right now. But it didn't happen overnight. There was also resistance from some of us older ones initially, but because youth kept on pushing, made the case, now they're part of nearly all Pacific delegations. So that's the way you basically get in. Organize yourselves, and then don't wait for somebody to tell you come in. You have to really push for it. Thank you.
Anyone else want to?
I think there's also when we do our programs and projects, we are not alone. We have allies, we have partners, and it's open for every single organization or individual who are willing to help. For as long as we align with our policies, we agree on certain terms, for as long as it always making people as the center of everything, then you can just join us. I have my email, I'll give to the organizer. And I said, we cannot just do it alone. It has to be a partnership from among us to be able to have an effective implementation of every programs and projects that you do in your area.
I'm going to ask all of our speakers, starting at your end, David, to give a 1 minute kind of your last thoughts on this topic and something that's inspiring.
My last thought is really the power of stories. Also just a personal story where I live now in Kilifi in Kenya. There's a storyteller, a Kenyan woman who's come into the community. And just seeing the power of storytelling in a storyteller, an inspiring person, is just amazing. So I think hearing that amplified here is actually one of my biggest take-homes from this COP, perhaps.
Oh, thanks. Nia Tero?
Well, the call for everyone to act on this is now. So everyone must move and contribute for a better world. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nia Tero. Daniel?
I just want to say, thank you for being in this space with us. Thank you for sharing your stories and listening to ours. If anything, what I'm most inspired by is just having a new perspective from new ways of telling stories and from a younger generation. And so to this group here and to all of us, I think it's really about allowing for space to create new stories and new ways of telling it, and really always kind of like remembering that like there's there's beauty in that, and we should always kind of seek that, even in the hardest of these stories. And many of these stories are hard to tell, to always resonate with that which is beautiful and that which is authentic. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Daniel. And Safa?
Thank you. It's just the power of stories and power of song. We had a side event at the Oceans Conference in Portugal that I moderated. On the panel were a number of seasoned diplomats, ministers, heads of state, academics. The last act was a song by a simple Pacific girl. Some of you may know her, Nia Tero. And at the end of that side event, everyone was crying. And that, for me, was the highlight. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually thought that Safa was going to break into song, but it doesn't seem that that's going to be the thing that happened. I wanted to just really thank all of our panel here. They've done an amazing job. This is a big subject if we're looking at the global space, but we're really looking at how do we connect these local actions and local things together. And just in this panel, we're hearing, I think, some really good ideas of how even some of these panelists might end up working together into the future. I think we hear about the importance of collaboration in this space, and bringing people together like this is a really important conversation. There's way too many organizations and initiatives going on in this particular space that are not coordinating with each other. And so I think what we're hearing a little bit about here is doing that and sharing the stories of local action so that it helps amplify all of the work that we're trying to do. And I mean us as a global community, and so that we can actually help people continue to live in their spaces and make an impact at the global level as well. And so connecting that together is the job of all of us, not just the people here, but all of the people in the audience as well. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Oceanic Global for a great idea to have this panel.